Hey guys, tonight we begin in the flickering torchlight of an ancient chamber, where incense curls upward like anxious thoughts, and a priest chants in an indecipherable tongue beside a trembling woman. You're lying on a stone slab that smells faintly of goat fat and dust, and someone has just declared your uterus a wanderer. That's right. You've got a case of hysteria, the catch-all diagnosis for what we might now call anxiety, depression, stress, or just having a feeling while female. The ancient Egyptians, ever fond of internal geography, believed your uterus could literally roam around your body like a tiny, confused animal. And when it wandered too far, say toward your lungs, it caused trouble, breathlessness, panic, weeping. The solution? Lure it back with fragrant oils applied down below, or scare it back with pungent smoke at the nose. Yes, your womb apparently could be tricked like a disobedient cat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In classical Greece, Hippocrates, yes, that Hippocrates, codified the idea of hysteria as a uterine disorder, possibly caused by celibacy. His advice? Marriage and regular intercourse, not exactly subtle. Women were expected to remain calm by fulfilling their natural biological role. If you were anxious, maybe you were just being stubborn about settling down with a nice toga-wearing guy who owned goats. Move forward a few centuries, and you're now in a medieval monastery. Your nerves are no longer a wandering womb, but the result of demonic influence. You've been weeping uncontrollably, sleepwalking, maybe even muttering in Latin. A nun is holding your hand while another prepares a mixture of holy water and bitter herbs. A priest considers whether you're possessed or just melancholic. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more spiritual or psychological, a kind of community therapy cloaked in religious robes. Of course, some treatments got very literal. Trepanning was still whispered about, a tiny hole drilled into your skull to let the bad spirits escape. It sounds like a medieval horror story, but it was real enough to leave plenty of skulls behind. You might get lucky, though, and instead be prescribed prayer, penance, and maybe a brisk walk barefoot through nettles. Character building, they'd say. The quirky part? In parts of early medieval Europe, women with visions and anxiety might become saints rather than patients, if they played it right. Hildegard of Bingen had migraine auras and ecstatic fits that today might be diagnosed as neurological or psychological conditions, but she channeled them into divine music and visions and became a holy celebrity. So maybe there was a career path for anxious girls, just one that required near starvation and an unusually charismatic prayer life. One poor soul in the 9th century was recorded as being afflicted with sudden fear of invisible wolves. The recommended treatment? Whispered psalms and a poultice of lavender and ox bile. Imagine waking up to a nun rubbing bile paste on your temples, humming softly, while your heart gallops through another anxiety spiral. And through it all, the implication is clear. Your distress is not yours. It's your uterus, your soul, or some external spirit. The idea that a woman's internal emotional life might matter on its own terms? That would take a while to catch on. Now you're stepping delicately across the cold marble floors of a 17th century apothecary, lace skirts rustling and breath shallow, not just from nerves, but from the corset cinched so tightly around your ribs that your lungs feel like deflated bellows. Welcome to early modern Europe, where anxiety is real, but only if you can afford it. The preferred term now is nervous complaint, or perhaps female vapors, and it's all very fashionable. You're encouraged to be delicate, pale, and vaguely unwell, just not too unwell. Fainting at the opera? Chic. Screaming into your nightgown because you can't sleep for the 10th night in a row? Less so. Your physician wears a powdered wig and probably smells faintly of clove oil and mercury. He looks into your eyes, tuts sympathetically, and prescribes a little bloodletting just to rebalance your humors. You're led to a velvet chair, and leeches are applied to the soft skin behind your ears. It tickles, which makes you laugh, until the lightheadedness kicks in. Mainstream medicine at the time leaned heavily on the four humors theory. Too much black bile? Welcome to melancholy. Too much yellow bile? Say hello to anxiety and irritation. The treatment? A relaxing herbal bath infused with chamomile, hops, and valerian, fragrant, warm, and occasionally full of boiled frog's legs. Supposedly adds vital moistness. But not everyone was so lucky. If you were a servant or milkmaid, you couldn't afford scented baths or a chaise lounge. Your nerves were treated with stern looks and maybe a cold bucket of water to the face. One fringe remedy for agitated females involved sewing small bits of wool into the lining of dresses soaked in rosemary vinegar. You'd walk around reeking like a salad. But hey, your symptoms might subside, or at least people would leave you alone. And then there was the lace. So much lace. Frilly caps and rigid bodices that made even sitting down feel like an ordeal. Historians still debate whether the anxiety was caused by these clothes or merely masked by them. Did society try to fix women's nerves with beauty, or did it just decorate the distress? By the 18th century, you might be recommended a trip to the countryside to restore your natural equilibrium. This generally meant 2 weeks of fresh air, unseasoned boiled chicken, and zero emotional stimulation. Think of it as the world's least fun retreat, but at least you weren't being bled again. Meanwhile, some male doctors started to notice something curious. A lot of their most anxious patients were well-educated women. Women who read, wrote poetry, questioned things. Better rein them in. Enter the idea that too much thinking could overheat a lady's nervous system. The solution? Simpler tasks, needlepoint, embroidery, quiet walks. Nothing that might make your brain too active. One particularly curious and real remedy included holding a live pigeon against your chest to absorb the sadness. No, really. The poor bird was believed to draw out your negative energy, sort of like an emotional sponge. Sadly, no one thought to ask how the pigeon felt about this arrangement. Still, the era wasn't entirely devoid of compassion. Gentle herbal teas, handwritten letters from sympathetic cousins, and long hours spent staring into the garden were all part of the unofficial care regimen for women with nerves. You could even keep a worry journal, provided it was tastefully bound and never shown to anyone. But in the end, just like before, your anxiety was never just yours. It was always framed in relation to how others experienced you. Was your husband inconvenienced? Was your family embarrassed? Then yes, something must be done. But if you suffered quietly, elegantly, and privately, congratulations. You were considered strong. You're reclining now, not by choice, on a velvet fainting couch in a sun-drenched Victorian parlor. Lace curtains drift like ghosts at the open window, and the wallpaper behind you is aggressively floral. You haven't gone outside in weeks. Your pulse flutters. You've been diagnosed with neurasthenia, a catch-all 19th century term that basically translates to, "This woman seems overwrought and no one knows what to do with her." Enter the infamous rest cure, You are to remain in bed for 6 to 8 weeks. No reading, no writing, no visitors, no talking, ideally. Your meals will be brought to you, heavy on the dairy, and you'll be massaged daily by a matronly nurse until your arms jiggle like unset pudding. Exercise? Forbidden. The idea is to calm your overwrought nerves by eliminating all stimulation, even joy. If that sounds like a recipe for slow, quiet madness, you're not wrong. This was the same cure prescribed to writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman, whose short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, is now required reading in many classrooms. In it, a woman descends into madness while trapped in a nursery-turned-bedroom, obsessing over peeling wallpaper. Historians still argue whether Gilman's tale was the first clinical indictment of patriarchal psychiatry, or just an eerily accurate diary. But the Victorians weren't just obsessed with rest. They loved diagnosis, and they especially loved diagnosing women. If you cried too easily, you had hysteria. If you couldn't sleep, you had night palpitations. If you got angry, you were nervously excitable. If you didn't get angry enough, you were emotionally flat. The range of acceptable female emotion was razor thin and policed like a lawn at Versailles. Of course, treatment varied wildly by class. If you were upper crust, your condition was treated with care, albeit deeply condescending care. If you were poor, your hysterics might be punished with institutionalization. Women in overcrowded asylums were subjected to isolation cells, cold water plunges, and in some cases, early electroshock. The same behavior in a duchess would be fragile. In a laundress, dangerous. Here's a quirky one. Some doctors in the 1880s recommended women reduce anxiety by adopting a pet hedgehog. The creature was meant to inspire calm and duty, cleaning its tiny cage, feeding it, watching it trundle across your floor like a spiky stress ball. Bonus points if it didn't bite. And if all else failed, there was always the vibrator. Invented in the late 19th century. Not for pleasure, mind you, but as a medical device to relieve hysteria. Women would visit their physicians for pelvic massage treatments. The fact that this became so widespread that machines were invented to automate the process? Let's just say many historians raise an eyebrow. But here's the haunting part. Despite all the corsets, the steam baths, the vibrating chairs, and the hedgehogs, the basic question remained, what if these women weren't sick? What if they were reacting, rationally, to the suffocating roles assigned to them? What if they didn't need bed rest, but freedom? The parlor grows quiet. You can hear the soft clink of china in the room below. You close your eyes and wonder, when does a woman's anxiety become her protest? You're back on a couch again, this time in a turn-of-the-century Viennese office, upholstered in dusty brocade. You're not lying down to rest, though. You're being analyzed. Across from you, Sigmund Freud twiddles his mustache and invites you to speak freely. Just don't expect too many follow-up questions. He already thinks he knows what's wrong with you. Your anxiety, according to him, stems from repressed desires, probably sexual ones, maybe something from childhood, maybe your mother. It's all very deep and dark and possibly your fault. Freud's theories gave anxiety a new vocabulary: neurosis, sublimation, penis envy. Yes, seriously. And offered talk therapy as a kind of exorcism of the psyche. Except the room still feels like a confessional booth, and you're still being told your mind doesn't belong to you. But something's shifting. By the 1920s, electricity is everywhere, and it's being sold as salvation. You can now purchase an electrotherapeutic belt that promises to ease your nerves via mild shocks. Fancy a home remedy? Just strap it on and let it tingle your anxiety away. Of course, the belts look suspiciously like modern weight loss contraptions, but they were marketed with all the solemnity of a religious relic. Meanwhile, in America, women's magazines are booming. They're full of cheerful advice about managing your nervous disposition with grace and lipstick. Got palpitations? Try deep breathing. Feeling blue? Reorganize your linens. There's a cultural shift toward taking control of your nerves, but not too much control. Assertiveness, after all, is still a bit unseemly in a lady. Historians still argue whether these early 20th century tools empowered women or simply repackaged obedience in prettier boxes. Either way, it's the birth of the self-help movement, complete with dainty calligraphy and testimonials from fictional housewives named Lillian. You also start to see anxiety linked to modern life itself. The noise, the speed, the rising tension of 2 world wars and rapid urbanization. Doctors warn of female neurasthenia brought on by factory work, city crowds, and, scandalously, typewriting. Yes, some believed that too much time on a typewriter could overstimulate the female nervous system, resulting in fatigue, headaches, and moral instability. Imagine getting diagnosed with emotional burnout just because you can't format a telegram. Let's not forget the fringe solutions: crystal-powered hairbrushes, hypnotic suggestion via phonograph record, and of course, the ever-expanding cabinet of tonics, many of which contained opiates, cocaine, or generous splashes of brandy. Your anxiety might not be cured, but at least you'd stop caring. One early 20th century psychiatrist proposed that all women had a domestic rhythm, a kind of internal metronome best maintained through homemaking. Deviate too far from it, pursue higher education, say, or agitate for voting rights, and you risked a complete nervous collapse. This wasn't a theory. It was, at the time, medical advice. Still, for every sexist manifesto, there was also a glimmer of resistance. Women like Karen Horney, yes, unfortunate name, challenged Freud's male-centered views and introduced more humanistic approaches. Anxiety, she said, wasn't just repressed desire. It could be a response to real-life constraints, social roles, gender norms, loneliness. You know, actual life stuff. By the 1930s, psychoanalysis had a foothold, but the couches were now everywhere. Manhattan, London, Berlin. Women whispered about their sessions over tea. Therapy was still mysterious, a little taboo, but it was becoming personal. For the first time, some women felt heard, even if only in 50-minute intervals. And yet, the deeper question lingered like pipe smoke. Was your anxiety an illness to be treated, or a message that something was deeply wrong with the world around you? You're standing at the kitchen counter now, wearing a housecoat with cheerful daisies printed on it, the radio playing softly in the background. It's 1958. You've just made your 3rd pot of coffee today, and the only sound, besides the buzz of the fridge, is your own heartbeat ticking like a metronome in your ears. You can't explain why, but you feel off, restless, uneasy, trapped. So you reach for the orange bottle in the cupboard. Enter Valium, the mother's little helper. In post-war America, anxiety gets a glossy new makeover. No more fainting couches or wandering wombs, just neat pills in plastic bottles, marketed directly to the very women whose nerves are fraying beneath the weight of the perfect suburban life. You're told your anxiety is normal, expected even, and solvable. Just pop 1, maybe 2. You'll feel better in time to cook dinner. Doctors are handing out prescriptions like Tic Tacs. The booming pharmaceutical industry has discovered an endless market, women overwhelmed by domesticity. Advertisements feature smiling mothers hugging their children under banners like, "You can cope again," and tranquility without tension. Nobody really talks about what you're coping with. Historians still argue whether this era marks a medical breakthrough or a cultural gaslighting. Were these drugs genuinely helpful, or a chemical muzzle for women who couldn't scream? One fringe but very real example: the invention of anxiety corsets, lightweight neoprene undergarments sold in the 1960s that promised to soothe your nerves by improving posture and hugging your organs into alignment. A nice idea, assuming your anxiety lives in your spleen. Meanwhile, the house you live in becomes a performance. You're expected to smile, bake, vacuum, and attend PTA meetings while quietly disintegrating inside. The line between identity and role grows dangerously thin. You're not just anxious, you're failing to be happy in paradise. And that? Well, that's on you. But the winds are starting to change. Feminist voices rise in the 1960s and 70s, questioning why so many women feel this same quiet desperation. Betty Friedan calls it the problem that has no name. You're starting to wonder if you're not broken at all, but bored, suffocated, forgotten. In the psychiatric world, diagnoses shift again. Anxiety disorders are formally classified, studied, and treated with a growing toolbox: therapy, medication, support groups. But even now, women's anxiety is often treated differently, underestimated, romanticized, or chalked up to hormones. You cry in a doctor's office, and he suggests a hobby. You mention panic attacks, and he asks if you've tried smiling more. By the 1980s, anti-anxiety drugs like Xanax become cultural shorthand, glamorous in movies, stigmatized in real life. Anxiety moves from parlor disorder to private shame. You suffer in secret because now you're supposed to have it all: career, family, ambition, balance. If you can't juggle it gracefully, maybe you're just not trying hard enough. And yet, there's more awareness now, more research, more language. Women are telling their stories in memoirs, on talk shows, online. Therapy becomes mainstream. Anxiety isn't just a symptom to silence, it's a signal to understand. Even so, the legacy lingers. For centuries, your anxiety was someone else's inconvenience, a thing to be cured, soothed, silenced. But now, perhaps, it's becoming something else: a voice, a message, a truth. And maybe this time, people are listening.